In the corporate world, decisions are often made on spreadsheets, not on people. Managers cut roles, label employees as redundant, and move on without a second thought. But sometimes, one small detail can bring an entire company to its knees. This is the story of Emma, the employee they thought was replaceable. Emma was never the kind of person who stood out in a room. She didn't speak loudly, didn't interrupt meetings, and never tried to impress anyone with big words or bold ideas. If you passed her in the hallway, you might not remember her face an hour later. And that, unknowingly, was the biggest mistake the company ever made. She joined the company 6 years earlier, at a time when it was still struggling to find its footing. Back then, the office was smaller, the systems were unstable, and deadlines felt impossible. Many employees treated the job as temporary, a stepping stone until something better came along. Emma didn't. She stayed. From the very beginning, she showed a quiet sense of responsibility. When something went wrong, she didn't panic or blame others. She fixed it. When regulations changed, she didn't complain about extra work. She studied them. When inspections were announced, managers felt a strange sense of relief, because Emma was there. Her desk was placed near the back, not because she asked for it, but because no one thought her position needed visibility. While others sat closer to management, Emma worked silently, surrounded by files, compliance documents, and system logs that most people didn't even understand. What made Emma different wasn't talent alone. It was consistency. She showed up early, often before the lights were fully on. She stayed late when audits ran long. She answered emails no one else wanted to deal with. Over time, her name became associated with one thing: reliability. If a system needed approval, Emma signed it. If a report needed accuracy, Emma checked it. If regulators had questions, Emma prepared the answers. Managers relied on her without realizing how deeply. They assumed she would always be there, quiet, efficient, invisible. And because she never demanded recognition, they never offered it. In meetings, Emma usually sat near the end of the table. While executives discussed strategy and profit margins, she listened carefully, taking notes not just on what was said, but on what was ignored. She noticed how often compliance was treated as an afterthought, how regulations were seen as obstacles rather than necessities. Occasionally, she would speak up. "There's a legal requirement here," she'd say calmly. Or, "We need authorization before proceeding." Her comments were acknowledged politely, then quickly forgotten once the meeting moved on. To management, she was useful, but not important. Over the years, the company grew. Profits increased. New managers were hired, many of whom had no idea how fragile the operation once was. They inherited a functioning system and assumed it ran itself. Emma watched this shift quietly. She saw how decision-makers became more confident and less careful. How speed started to matter more than accuracy. How cost-cutting became a priority, even when it created risk. Still, she did her job. What no one seemed to remember was that many of the systems they now took for granted existed because Emma had helped build them. She had been there when procedures were written, when licenses were applied for, when inspectors demanded explanations that no one else could give. She remembered the stress of those early years vividly, the long nights studying regulations, the fear of making a mistake that could shut the company down. That responsibility had never really left her. It had just become routine. To Emma, her work wasn't just a job. It was accountability. The kind that didn't show up on performance charts but carried legal consequences. Yet, in the corporate world, visibility often matters more than value. As the company expanded, layers of management were added. New titles appeared. New departments formed. Emma's role stayed the same, quiet, stable, and misunderstood. People assumed that because she wasn't managing others, her position was minor. Because she wasn't aggressive, she lacked ambition. Because she didn't complain, she didn't matter. They were wrong on every level. Emma understood something most of them didn't. Systems don't fail loudly at first. They fail quietly, through small oversights, ignored details, and assumptions. She had seen companies collapse before. She had watched powerful organizations fall apart not because of competitors, but because of arrogance. Because someone, somewhere, assumed a role was redundant. And now, as the company began talking about restructuring and efficiency, Emma felt a familiar unease. Emails started circulating, phrases like cost optimization, streamlining roles, and eliminating overlap appeared more frequently. Managers spoke about lean operations with confidence. No one asked Emma what she thought. She continued doing her work as usual, signing off on operations, maintaining compliance, ensuring everything stayed legal. She didn't panic. She didn't protest. But deep down, she sensed something important. The company no longer understood itself. They believed success came from strategy and leadership alone. They had forgotten the invisible foundations that kept everything standing. Emma was one of those foundations. And like most foundations, she was only noticed once someone decided she wasn't necessary. As she shut down her computer one evening and prepared to leave, she looked around the office, at the busy desks, the confident managers, the systems running smoothly. None of them realized how close they were to discovering a very expensive truth. Because when you mistake silence for insignificance, you often overlook the person holding everything together. The license didn't come easily to Emma. In fact, it came at a time when the company itself wasn't sure it would survive. Years ago, when Emma had been with the organization for barely a year, a serious problem emerged. New government regulations were introduced overnight, and suddenly the company's core operations fell under a stricter legal framework. Without a certified operating license, the entire system would be declared non-compliant and shut down. Management panicked. Meetings were called. Emails flew back and forth. Consultants were brought in, all charging massive fees, all offering vague solutions. The truth was simple and terrifying. The company needed a licensed operator immediately, or months of work would be lost. The problem was, no one wanted the responsibility. The license required extensive training, background verification, written exams, on-site inspections, and personal accountability. It wasn't something the company could own. The license would be issued to an individual, not to a department or a brand. And whoever held it would be legally responsible for everything that followed. Managers avoided eye contact when the topic came up. Senior staff made excuses. Too busy, too risky, too complicated. Everyone wanted the benefits of compliance, but no one wanted their name attached to it. Emma listened quietly during one of those tense meetings. She had read the regulation documents on her own time. She understood what the license meant, not just professionally, but legally. She knew the risks. She also knew what would happen if no one stepped forward. So she raised her hand. "I can do it," she said calmly. The room went silent. A few people looked surprised. Others looked relieved. Some even looked confused. Why would she volunteer for something so heavy? Management accepted immediately. There was no ceremony. No promise of promotion. Just a quiet nod and a stack of documents slid across the table. From that moment on, Emma's workload doubled. She attended training sessions after work, often staying late into the night. She studied legal language that most people avoided. She learned how regulators thought, how inspections worked, and how small mistakes could lead to massive penalties. While others went home, Emma stayed. While others complained about deadlines, Emma memorized compliance codes. While others slept, Emma revised procedures again and again, because the license exam allowed no room for error. Months passed. Finally, the day came. Government officials arrived for inspection. They reviewed documents, asked questions, and tested systems. Emma answered calmly, clearly, without hesitation. When the approval letter arrived, it didn't carry the company's logo at the top. It carried her name. Emma was officially the licensed operator. At the time, management celebrated briefly. Compliance was secured. Operations continued. Everyone moved on. But Emma never forgot what that license truly meant. Every time she signed off on a system restart, she was personally accountable. If there was an accident, a violation, or a regulatory breach, it wouldn't be the company facing criminal liability, it would be her. Still, she didn't complain. She built procedures, trained staff informally, and created safeguards that reduced risk. She became the quiet gatekeeper, approving, rejecting, correcting, often without recognition. Over time, the license faded into the background of corporate memory. New managers joined who had no idea how it was obtained. They assumed it was just another document in the company's files. Some even believed the company owned it. Emma knew better. She knew the license expired periodically. She tracked renewals herself. She submitted reports personally. She communicated with regulators directly, shielding the company from complexity they never wanted to understand. In meetings, when executives spoke confidently about scaling operations or speeding up processes, Emma often paused them. "We need to stay within license limits," she would say. Sometimes they listened. Sometimes they sighed. To them, she was cautious, conservative, slow. They didn't realize she was protecting them. The irony was cruel. The more smoothly things ran, the less visible Emma became. Her success made her seem unnecessary. Because nothing went wrong, management assumed the risk didn't exist. Years passed. The company grew richer, louder, bolder. And Emma remained the same, quiet, careful, legally responsible. She understood something most of them didn't. A license isn't power until it's missing. She never used it as leverage. Never mentioned it in performance reviews. Never reminded management how much depended on her. Why would she? Responsibility wasn't something she bragged about. But as restructuring rumors began circulating, Emma noticed something unsettling. People talked about roles, titles, salaries, redundancy. No one talked about legal authority. No one asked, what happens if Emma isn't here? And that was when Emma realized something dangerous had happened over the years. The company had forgotten who carried its legal backbone. They saw the license as paperwork. She saw it as law. And soon, very soon, the difference between those two perspectives would become impossible to ignore. The first sign of trouble didn't come as an announcement. It came as a tone change. Emma noticed it before anyone else did. Meetings that once focused on stability now revolved around speed. Words like growth, optimization, and scaling replaced discussions about safety and compliance. Senior leadership spoke with confidence, almost arrogance, as if the systems beneath them were unbreakable. They weren't. It began when the board hired an external consulting firm. Their arrival was announced with enthusiasm. Management praised them as industry experts, people who could cut costs and maximize efficiency. To most employees, it sounded impressive. To Emma, it sounded dangerous. The consultants never asked how the company survived its early years. They didn't ask who held legal authority or how compliance was maintained. They asked for charts, org structures, salary data, job titles. Everything was reduced to numbers. Emma watched from the sidelines as consultants walked through the office with tablets in hand, nodding to one another as if they already understood everything. They scheduled interviews with department heads, but never with her. She wasn't a manager. She didn't lead a team. On paper, she looked replaceable. Behind closed doors, leadership meetings grew longer. Emails with subject lines like operational streamlining and redundancy analysis appeared more frequently. Emma was copied on some of them, not because her input was needed, but because she handled compliance documentation. In one meeting, a consultant spoke confidently while pointing at a slide. "We've identified overlapping responsibilities," he said. "Certain roles can be merged without risk." No one asked, without risk to what? Emma sat quietly, listening. Another slide appeared. A list of job titles. Each followed by a recommendation: retain, merge, or eliminate. Emma's role appeared near the bottom. The consultant frowned slightly. "This position," he said, "seems largely administrative. Low dependency, high replaceability." A senior manager nodded. "Yes, others already support those functions." Emma felt a familiar tightness in her chest, not fear, but clarity. They didn't understand what she did. And worse, they didn't realize they didn't understand. She considered speaking up, explaining that her role wasn't administrative, that it carried legal authority. that removing her would halt operations entirely. But she stopped herself. Because the room wasn't listening. This wasn't a discussion. It was a conclusion disguised as analysis. Over the following weeks, the plan moved forward quickly. Department heads were asked to identify non-essential staff. Managers were encouraged to think in terms of efficiency, not dependency. Emma's manager, newer, ambitious, and eager to impress, reviewed her role briefly. "She's reliable," he said during one call. "But I think we can distribute her responsibilities." No one asked him how. No one asked who would sign off legally. The assumption was simple. If Emma left, the work would still get done. That assumption was the company's greatest weakness. Emma noticed the shift in behavior around her. Managers stopped asking for her input and started assuming answers. Compliance deadlines were discussed casually. Shortcuts were suggested. She pushed back quietly. "We need authorization for that," she reminded them. "We need to stay within licensed limits." Sometimes they nodded. Sometimes they sighed. To them, Emma was slowing progress. What they didn't realize was that she was holding the line between legal operation and shutdown. One evening, as Emma reviewed renewal documents for her operating license, she paused. The expiration date was months away, but the paperwork required advance submission. She smiled faintly at the irony. The company was planning its future, without realizing it depended entirely on her signature. The restructuring plan was finalized on a Friday afternoon. Executives congratulated themselves on decisive leadership. The consultants presented charts showing cost savings and leaner operations. Names were highlighted. Numbers were reduced. Emma's name was there. Not discussed. Not debated. Just marked. She found out indirectly, through a calendar invite sent to HR, mistakenly copied to her inbox. Redundancy review. Emma, last name. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Emma stared at the screen for a long moment. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel scared. She felt disappointed. Not because she was being let go, but because the company had finally proven what she had quietly suspected for years. They didn't understand their own foundation. That night, Emma left the office later than usual. She walked past departments buzzing with energy, people discussing bonuses, promotions, and growth. No one noticed her leave. No one realized they were watching the last few days of stability. Because when a company confuses silence with insignificance, it often cuts the very role that keeps it alive. And soon, very soon, they would understand what redundant really meant. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 11 a.m. Emma saw the invite the night before. The subject line was short, clean, and emotionless. HR discussion, role review. She didn't need clarification. In 6 years, Emma had seen enough people walk into similar meetings and come out changed. Some returned to their desks quietly, eyes red. Some never came back at all. The company liked soft words, review, discussion, transition, because they hid final decisions behind polite language. Emma closed her laptop calmly. She didn't lose sleep that night. Not because she didn't care, but because deep down, she already knew how this would end. The decision had been made long before the meeting invite arrived. The next morning, she arrived at work as usual. Same time. Same routine. Same quiet desk near the back. She completed her compliance checks, reviewed pending approvals, and sent out 2 reminder emails about regulatory deadlines. No one responded. At 10:55, Emma stood up and walked toward the HR floor. The room was small and carefully neutral. White walls, a round table, and 3 chairs arranged in a way that felt intentionally unbalanced. 1 chair on one side. 2 on the other. HR was already there, along with Emma's manager. Both smiled politely, the kind of smile people practice for difficult conversations. "Please, have a seat," HR said. Emma sat down. There was a brief pause. Papers were adjusted. A pen clicked. HR began reading from a prepared script. "Emma, thank you for joining us today. As you know, the company has been undergoing a strategic restructuring aimed at improving efficiency and aligning resources with future goals." Emma listened silently. After careful consideration, HR continued, we've identified certain roles that are no longer required in their current form. There it was. Your position, HR said gently, has been identified as redundant. The word landed exactly as it always did. Clean, clinical, final. Emma didn't react. She had learned long ago that reactions made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people rushed through conversations. Instead, she asked a question. Who will take over compliance authorization? She said calmly. Her manager shifted slightly in his chair. That will be handled internally, he replied quickly. We'll redistribute responsibilities across teams. Emma nodded slowly. Is there someone licensed to do that? She asked. A pause. HR glanced at the manager. The manager cleared his throat. We're confident the transition will be smooth, he said. Our legal team is aware of requirements. Emma knew that wasn't true, but she also knew this wasn't the moment to correct them. HR slid a folder across the table. Inside were the documents, termination notice, severance details, confidentiality reminders. Everything was prepared. Everything was final. You'll receive 2 months severance, HR said. We appreciate your contributions over the years. Appreciation, Emma thought, would have sounded different. She skimmed the documents carefully, not emotionally, but professionally. She noticed how compliance responsibilities were described vaguely, almost casually, as if they were interchangeable tasks. They didn't mention the license. Not once. Emma looked up. Is there anything else you need from me before today ends? She asked. HR smiled, relieved. Just a handover of your files and system access, she said. IT will assist. Emma nodded. She signed the papers. No protest. No argument. No explanation. Because explaining required an audience willing to listen, and this room wasn't one. As she stood up, her manager finally spoke, perhaps out of guilt. This wasn't personal, he said. It's just business. Emma met his eyes. I understand, she replied. And she did. She returned to her desk quietly. The office buzzed around her, unaware that anything significant had just happened. She began packing her things slowly and methodically. A notebook filled with handwritten compliance notes. A small plant she'd kept alive for years. A framed photo from a regulatory workshop. One she had attended alone. A co-worker approached hesitantly. I heard, she began. Emma smiled softly. It's okay, she said. Take care. She sent one final email to her team. Short, professional, polite. She reminded them of upcoming regulatory deadlines and where certain documents were stored. She did not mention the license. That responsibility ended the moment she signed the papers. At 4:30 p.m., she handed in her badge. IT disabled her access. Security nodded politely as she walked out. As the elevator doors closed, Emma felt something unexpected. Not fear, not anger. Relief. Because for the first time in years, the weight she carried no longer belonged to her. Outside, the city moved as usual. Cars passed. People hurried by. No one noticed a company quietly stepping toward disaster. Emma took a deep breath. They had called her role redundant. Now, they would learn the difference between a job title and legal authority. And the lesson wouldn't come from anger. It would come from reality. The company expected drama. That was the strange thing. Emma could sense it in the air as she packed her desk, the quiet glances, the careful distance people kept, the way conversations softened when she walked past. Everyone was waiting for something, anger, tears, a confrontation. That's how endings usually happened here. But Emma gave them none of it. She folded her things slowly, with the same precision she used in her work. Not because she was trying to prove anything, but because rushing felt unnecessary. Her time no longer belonged to them. The office continued to function around her. Phones rang. Meetings went on. Someone laughed near the coffee machine. The company had already moved forward in its mind. Emma noticed how quickly that happened. 6 years of consistency, reduced to a single afternoon. She opened a drawer and found an old folder, Compliance drafts from years ago, handwritten notes from inspections, annotations she had made for herself when procedures were still unclear. She paused, remembering long nights spent making sure the company wouldn't fail an audit. She closed the folder and left it behind. Those documents belonged to the company. The responsibility no longer did. A colleague approached quietly. "I'm really sorry," she said, voice low. "This doesn't feel right." Emma smiled gently. "Take care of yourself," she replied. "That's what matters." She didn't offer warnings. She didn't explain what would happen next. Not because she wanted the company to suffer, but because she had learned a hard truth over the years. People rarely believe what they haven't experienced. Before leaving, Emma opened her email one last time. She wrote a short message to her team, professional, neutral, kind. She reminded them of upcoming compliance deadlines, the location of certain files, and ongoing regulatory requirements. She did not mention the operating license. That wasn't an oversight. It was clarity. The license was not a company asset. It was personal. And from the moment she was labeled redundant, it stopped being their concern. At the exit desk, IT collected her laptop and phone. Access was revoked. Systems logged her out permanently. "Good luck," the technician said awkwardly. "Thank you," Emma replied sincerely. She stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Calm, composed, unchanged. Not the face of someone defeated. The face of someone released. Outside, the late afternoon sun reflected off the building's glass walls. Emma stood still for a moment, looking up. Inside those walls, systems were still running. Machines were still operating. People were still confident. They believed nothing had changed. Emma turned and walked away. That evening, her phone remained silent. No calls. No messages. No urgent emails. She cooked dinner. She read. She slept deeply. The next day, the silence continued. Inside the company, managers began assigning Emma's responsibilities casually. Tasks were divided. Checklists were copied. Approvals were assumed. But something small went wrong. A routine system restart required authorization. Someone clicked approve, and the system rejected it. They tried again. Rejected. IT blamed software. Operations blamed process. Everyone assumed it was a glitch. No one panicked yet. By the third day, minor delays became noticeable. A compliance report couldn't be submitted. A regulator requested documentation that no one could sign off. Emails began circulating. Does anyone know who's handling this now? Can we use previous approvals as reference? Who has authority? Emma's phone buzzed for the first time late that afternoon. An unknown number. She didn't answer. She knew what it meant. The company was starting to feel the absence, but not fully understand it yet. This was the moment before realization, the calm before clarity. Emma wasn't angry. She wasn't satisfied. She was simply done. Because when you walk away with your dignity intact, you don't need to announce your power. You just let the world discover it on its own. And soon, very soon, the company would understand that what they had dismissed as redundant was never a role. It was a foundation. At first, no one called it a crisis. That was the mistake. On Monday morning, operations began as usual. Machines powered up. Dashboards loaded. Teams logged in, confident that whatever Emma used to do could be handled internally. That phrase, so simple, so dangerous, was repeated like a comfort blanket. By mid-morning, a supervisor noticed something odd. A routine compliance report had failed to submit. It wasn't urgent. Not yet. They assumed it was a system lag. IT was notified. A ticket was raised. Someone suggested restarting the process. Another suggested waiting until the afternoon. In a company that had grown used to smooth operations, small issues were brushed aside easily. By lunchtime, the issue hadn't resolved. The system required an authorization code, one that had always been entered automatically after Emma's sign-off. Now, the field remained blank. A junior analyst asked a simple question in a team chat. Who's responsible for compliance approval now? No one answered. Instead, someone replied with a guess. Legal, I think. Legal disagreed. Operations pushed it back to IT. IT pushed it back to compliance. Compliance pushed it to management. Management assumed someone else had it covered. By the end of the day, one production line slowed down. Not stopped, just slowed. A warning light blinked on a dashboard few people checked regularly. Still, no panic. Tuesday morning was different. An automated regulatory checkpoint failed. This time, the system didn't just slow, it locked. Production halted on 2 lines. A supervisor tried to override the block. Access denied. Another tried to upload a previous approval. Rejected. A manager grew impatient. Just bypass it, he said. IT refused. That would be illegal. The word hung in the air longer than expected. Illegal. A meeting was called. People filled the conference room quickly. Operations, IT, compliance, and 2 senior managers. Everyone talked at once. Screens were shared. Emails were forwarded. Someone finally asked the question no one wanted to ask. Who actually has legal authority to approve this? Silence. Documents were pulled up. Old emails were searched. Procedures were reviewed. Emma's name appeared everywhere. Approval logs. Regulatory correspondence. Audit trails. Every critical authorization over the past 6 years carried the same signature. Emma. A manager frowned. Where is she now? The answer came quietly. She was let go. Redundant. The room shifted. Phones came out. Messages were typed, then deleted. Someone suggested calling her. Someone else suggested waiting until legal confirmed the situation. Legal was already confirming it. By noon, the situation escalated. A government regulator emailed requesting clarification on a delayed report. The deadline had passed. The system flagged it automatically. This was no longer an internal issue. This was exposure. The legal team requested emergency access to licensing records. What they found made their stomachs drop. The operating license wasn't registered to the company. It never had been. It was issued personally. To Emma. No secondary holder. No temporary authorization. No company override. The room went silent again, this time, heavier. Someone whispered. So, we can't operate. Legal answered carefully. Not legally. By Tuesday afternoon, 3 production lines were shut down completely. Clients were informed of temporary delays. No one used the word shutdown yet, but everyone felt it. Executives demanded updates. Fix it. How long? Who's responsible? No one had answers. The irony was brutal. The systems were working exactly as designed. The compliance safeguards Emma had built were doing their job, preventing an authorized operation. She had protected the company so well that now it couldn't bypass her absence. By Wednesday morning, financial losses were measurable. Thousands per hour. Then tens of thousands. Then more. An emergency board call was scheduled. This time, there were no consultants. No confidence. No polished language. Only urgency. The CEO spoke first. How did we miss this? No one replied. The truth was uncomfortable. They hadn't missed it, they had ignored it. Emma had warned them quietly for years. They just hadn't listened. Now, regulators were asking questions. Clients were threatening penalties. Media attention loomed if delays continued. And Emma still hadn't answered her phone. Inside her apartment, Emma sat calmly at her table, sipping coffee. She had seen the missed calls. The messages. The shift in tone, from polite to urgent to desperate. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt confirmation. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. Back at the company, panic finally broke through. A senior executive slammed his hand on the table. Call her again, he said. Now. Another added. We'll fix the paperwork later. Just get operations running. Legal shook their head. That's not how the law works. The company had reached the moment Emma always knew would come, the moment where assumptions collapsed under reality. By Wednesday evening, the truth was undeniable. They hadn't fired an employee. They had removed the only legal key keeping the company alive. And now, the entire organization waited for the person they had dismissed as redundant to decide what happened next. By Thursday morning, the company was no longer pretending. The word crisis finally entered the conversation. Executives gathered in the largest conference room. No laptops closed, no phones on silent. Every screen showed numbers dropping, timelines breaking, and alerts stacking up faster than anyone could read them. This wasn't a systems failure. This was a leadership failure. The legal team stood at the front of the room, faces tense, voices careful. They had spent the entire night reviewing government records, licensing databases, and historical compliance filings. What they found was undeniable. The head of legal cleared his throat. "We've confirmed it," he said. "There is no workaround." The CEO leaned forward. "Confirmed what?" "The operating license," legal continued, choosing his words slowly, "is issued personally. Not to the company. Not to a department. To an individual." A pause. Someone already knew the answer, but needed to hear it. "Who?" the CEO asked. The name appeared on the screen behind them. "Emma." The room went silent in a way that felt heavy, almost physical. A senior executive laughed once, nervously. "That can't be right. She was admin support." Legal shook his head. She was the licensed authority. Every approval, every audit, every regulatory submission, signed by her. Screens changed. Documents appeared. Timelines stretched back years. Emma's name was everywhere. Her signature. Her credentials. Her direct communication with regulators. The company hadn't just relied on her. They had built everything around her, and forgotten. One manager sank back in his chair. "We let her go," he said quietly. "For redundancy." No one corrected him, because saying it out loud made it worse. Another executive spoke, voice tight. "So what happens if we keep operating?" Legal didn't hesitate. Immediate violation. Heavy fines. Possible forced shutdown. Personal liability for leadership. The CEO rubbed his face slowly. This wasn't a delay anymore. This was existential. "How long until we can license someone else?" someone asked. Legal answered honestly. "Best case. 6 to 9 months. Assuming training, exams, inspections, and approval." 6 to 9 months. The number echoed through the room. The company wouldn't survive 6 weeks like this. Anger replaced shock. How did this happen? Why wasn't this documented? Why didn't anyone flag this risk? Eyes slowly turned toward HR, toward management, toward the restructuring committee. No one spoke. Because the truth was simple and ugly. They had assumed importance followed hierarchy. They had confused visibility with value. Emma had never advertised her power. She had never demanded recognition. She had simply done the job, quietly, legally, completely. And now she was gone. Phones buzzed again. Another regulator email. Another client escalation. Another financial alert. The CEO stood up. "Get her on the phone," he said. "Now." A senior manager tried again. Voicemail. A message was sent, this time carefully worded, respectful, urgent. No response. Inside Emma's apartment, the world felt strangely calm. She had woken early, not from anxiety, but from habit. She made tea and sat by the window, watching the city move. Her phone lay face down on the table. She knew what was happening. She had spent years preparing for the possibility, not emotionally, but mentally. She had read enough case studies, seen enough failures, understood enough human behavior. Companies don't notice foundations until cracks appear. She picked up her phone and turned it over. Missed calls. Voicemails. Messages that had shifted tone completely. The first had been polite. The second apologetic. The third urgent. The fourth desperate. Emma didn't smile. She didn't feel victorious. She felt validated. Back at the company, panic deepened. An executive suggested something reckless. What if we ask her to authorize remotely? Just once. Legal shut it down immediately. She's not under contract. Any authorization would expose her, and us. Someone else suggested offering her job back. The room hesitated. Not because they didn't want to, but because they knew it wouldn't be that simple. Emma had been dismissed as redundant. That word couldn't be undone. The CEO finally said what no one else had the courage to say. We need her more than she needs us. Silence followed. That sentence marked the true shift of power. For years, the company had believed it held control. Salaries, titles, access. But control without legal authority was an illusion. The legal team prepared a full briefing, explaining Emma's leverage, the limits of negotiation, and the consequences of delay. The conclusion was clear. Without Emma's cooperation, the company would collapse. By late afternoon, the CEO personally drafted a message. No templates. No HR language. No corporate Polish. Just honesty. He apologized. He acknowledged the mistake. He asked for a conversation. The message was sent. Inside her apartment, Emma read it slowly. She set the phone down. She didn't respond yet. Not because she was cruel, but because she understood timing. The company needed to fully grasp the situation. To feel the weight of its decisions. To recognize that this wasn't about ego or revenge. This was about respect and consequence. By nightfall, the company's leadership sat in the darkened boardroom, waiting. For the first time in its history, the entire organization depended on someone it had underestimated. And Emma, once invisible, once silent, once labeled redundant, now held the future in her hands. Not because she demanded power, but because the law had given it to her, and she had carried it responsibly, even when no one noticed. The call came at 7:42 a.m. Not from HR. Not from legal. Not from some assistant hiding behind formal language. It was from the CEO. Emma stared at the phone as it vibrated softly on the table. The name on the screen felt unreal, not because she had never spoken to him before, but because this time the balance of power had shifted completely. She let it ring twice more. Then she answered. "Hello," she said, calm and even. On the other end, the voice was different from the one she remembered. Slower. Measured. Careful. "Emma, thank you for taking the call." She said nothing. The silence forced him to continue. "I want to apologize," he began. "For how things were handled. For the decision. For the language used." Emma listened without interrupting. For years, she had been interrupted. "I won't pretend this call isn't about the situation we're in," he continued. "We made a mistake. A serious one." She finally spoke. "You didn't make a mistake," she said quietly. "You made a choice." The words landed harder than any raised voice could have. There was a pause. "You're right," the CEO said. "And we're facing the consequences of it." He didn't rush into requests. He didn't beg. He knew better. "We need to talk," he said. "In person, if possible. With legal present." Emma considered. "Before we do that," she replied, "I need clarity." "Of course. I'm not an employee," she said. "I will not return as one." Another pause. "I understand. And any discussion we have," Emma continued, "is not about fixing your mistake. It's about defining my involvement, if any." "Yes," he said. "That's fair." They agreed to meet that afternoon. At the office, the atmosphere was unrecognizable. Where there had once been confidence, there was tension. Where there had been authority, there was uncertainty. People whispered. Screens showed frozen processes. Managers avoided eye contact. Emma walked in without an ID badge. She didn't need one. The conference room was already full: CEO, head of legal, 2 board members, and an external counsel. Everyone stood when she entered. Not out of protocol. Out of instinct. She Saturday. No small talk followed. The CEO spoke first. "We've reviewed the situation in full," he said. "We acknowledge that without your authorization, we cannot legally operate." Emma nodded once. Legal slid a document across the table. "We'd like to propose a consulting agreement," the lawyer said. "Temporary, at first." Emma didn't pick it up. "I'll tell you what I won't do," she said. "I won't sign something rushed. I won't take responsibility without authority. And I won't fix problems created by poor governance without safeguards." No one objected. She continued. "If I'm involved, it's as an independent consultant. Limited hours. Full compliance authority. Clear indemnification." Legal took notes rapidly. "And compensation," Emma added. "Reflecting not my past salary, but the risk and responsibility you're asking me to carry." A board member shifted uncomfortably. "We're prepared to discuss terms," the CEO said carefully. Emma leaned back. "There's one more thing," she said. "Transparency." Everyone looked up. No more assumptions. No more quiet dependencies. If this company continues, it does so with proper documentation, secondary licensing paths, and succession planning. The legal head nodded slowly. "That's reasonable." Reasonable. The word felt ironic. They discussed timelines. Scope. Safeguards. Penalties. Emma answered questions with precision. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't cold. She was professional. By the end of the meeting, no agreement was signed, but something more important had happened. Respect had returned. As Emma stood to leave, the CEO spoke again. "For what it's worth," he said, "we underestimated you." Emma paused at the door. "No," she replied. "You underestimated your own system." She left. That evening, the company's leadership reviewed the draft contract in silence. They understood now. This wasn't about rehiring someone they had lost. This was about earning access to something they had taken for granted. And for the first time, the company wasn't negotiating from strength. It was negotiating from necessity. Emma, meanwhile, sat at home, reviewing the draft on her own terms. She wasn't deciding whether to help them. She was deciding how much of herself she was willing to give to an organization that had once called her expendable. The power had shifted. And everyone in that room knew it. The contract took 3 days. Not because it was complicated, but because it mattered. Every word was argued. Every clause examined. Every comma questioned. The company had lawyers on one side of the table, Emma on the other, alone, calm, unhurried. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. The power was written into the law. The first draft came back heavy with corporate language, protective of the company, cautious about authority, vague where it mattered most. Emma read it once. Then she marked it. Red lines filled the margins. "This won't work," she said simply. The legal team exchanged looks. "What specifically?" the head lawyer asked. Emma pointed to a section. "Here," she said. "You want responsibility without decision-making power." She flipped another page. "And here, you expect unlimited availability." Another. "And this indemnity clause protects you, not me." She closed the document. "I'm not here to save you from your mistakes," she said. "I'm here to ensure compliance. That requires autonomy." The CEO leaned forward. "What would autonomy look like?" he asked. Emma didn't hesitate. "Final sign-off authority on all regulated operations. No overrides. No exceptions." A board member stiffened. "That's extensive." Emma met his eyes. "So is the risk." Silence followed. The company's internal counsel tried another approach. "We need operational flexibility," he said. Emma nodded. "Then build proper systems," she replied. "Not dependencies." That sentence cut deeper than intended. Because it named the truth. The company hadn't built resilience. They had built convenience. Day 2 was worse. Financial losses were now public within the company. Departments were being restructured quietly. Bonuses frozen. Promotions paused. The pressure to finalize the agreement intensified. But Emma didn't rush. She requested external review. She demanded documentation updates. She insisted on audit rights. Each request was reasonable. Each one felt unbearable to leadership, because it meant admitting how much they had relied on what they never respected. The turning point came when legal presented worst-case projections. If this drags another week, the lawyer said, we face regulator-initiated suspension. That changed everything. The CEO exhaled slowly. Accept her terms, he said. Just like that. Not because they wanted to. Because they had no alternative. By the end of the third day, the contract reflected a reality the company had never planned for. Emma wasn't an employee. She wasn't management. She wasn't HR. She was a gatekeeper. Limited hours. Premium compensation. Full authority over compliance approvals. Zero operational interference. The final clause was Emma's addition. A knowledge transfer requirement. You will train a successor, the CEO said, surprised. Emma nodded. But not quietly, she replied. And not without documentation. The papers were signed that evening. No applause followed. Only relief, and something close to shame. The next morning, Emma returned to the building. Not as staff. As authority. Systems that had been frozen for days lit back up as she authorized operations. Methodically, carefully, legally. Within hours, production resumed. Clients were notified. Regulators acknowledged compliance restoration. The company breathed again. But it breathed differently now. No one rushed past Emma in the halls anymore. No one assumed. Every approval passed through her. Every major decision paused at her desk. Managers learned patience. Executives learned humility. And Emma learned something else. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It only needs to exist, quietly, undeniably. One afternoon, a junior employee stopped her. Why didn't you fight when they let you go? He asked. Emma smiled, not unkindly. Because the law was already on my side, she said. The company had survived. But it would never forget the week it nearly collapsed, not from competition, not from market forces, but from misunderstanding its own foundation. And Emma, once dismissed as redundant, had rewritten the rules without raising her voice.